Hello. So today we shall discuss Europe's subservience and lack of confidence, and hence its irrelevance in the current events. To some extent, its importance. In the aftermath of the Second World War, many interesting things happened. The colonial powers were defanged, dethroned. France, and even UK, for that matter, had to give up some of its control over the Suez Canal, for example. A lot of countries got the freedom. The U.S. had something to do with it. The pressure it put on those colonial powers, for example. NATO was created for actually three different goals: to keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out of Europe, for example, and keep Germany down. And NATO, to a large extent, succeeded in all three for a long time. Now, there's also a lot of things that we need to pay attention to. American culture and financial systems were adopted wholesale by European countries, so much so that they lost pride in promoting their own music, movies, theater in Europe. The dollar became the de facto currency for a long time until the euro came about. And then the petrodollar still rules. So uh, Europe had to be dependent on the US for several different reasons in several different ways. But importantly, the gradual decline in their cultural pride and gradual increasing in becoming more American brought about a subservience, a lack of pride in their own civilization to some extent, one might say. Most movie theaters in Europe play mostly American movies. Hollywood rules the roost, and American pop songs and hip hop have taken over all personal listening and concert experiences. So much so that even musak in elevators in Europe is American. It is hilarious. The economic and military dependence on the USA, the economic changes due to the demographic changes in those countries, the trade pattern changes that came about with globalization, the globalization of labor in particular, made European countries susceptible to shocks, in particular to the current geopolitical shocks, and even before that, to the pandemic related shocks. The dependence on foreign imports, a necessary consequence of globalization, of not understanding national interests, for example, were all symptoms of the trouble they were going to go through the next 5 years, for example. Now, both the pandemic and the current geopolitical turmoil, especially being faced by Europe, it has exposed European vulnerabilities and their inability to take care of themselves. The Europeans were also blind to the rise of nationalistic fervor in the other power centers in the world. Russia and China, for example, have been nationalistic for a long time. They might call themselves communist, but then, hey, these are the communists that have a lot of civilizational and national pride. So it seems much of that has been kind of diluted in Europe, for example, for greater integration. One might even say the Europeans suppressed their own internal nationalistic tendencies, especially after the Second World War. And then when they traded whatever little cultural pride and nationalistic tendencies might have remained after the Second World War, they sort of gave them up for greater European integration, probably. The Europeans did not comprehend the rise of nationalism in the USA either. The power of the people that brought President Trump and his slogans into operational mode now. MAGA, for example, was probably discounted by the Europeans. Anyway, so where does Europe go from here? It has become a favorite punching bag of President Trump. His belligerence against Russian military actions in Ukraine, juxtaposed with the inability to fend for themselves without US military and economic support, it shows them up to be paper tigers. So Europe is definitely at crossroads. Does it want to be traded or treated as adults capable of handling their own affairs? Or is it going to be bullied by China and even the USA, just as most other middle powers are today? So, the going is tough for the next decade or so for Europe for several different reasons. The trade patterns will have to change. Their dependence on energy supplies are already shaken. They have to find new agreements, trade agreements, deal with tariffs here and there, deal with economic pressures, demographic pressures, immigration related headaches, and so on and so forth. So it's indeed crossroads for Europe, and being subservient is one way to handle it, but the lack of confidence shows. So let's see how it evolves.